Okay, so the actual book of Jonah. This is it, by the way. We call it a book, but this is the entire book right here, from the beginning here down to the end of this next column of this last page. Like that's all there is to the book of Jonah. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. So Nineveh has a reputation for wickedness. It will get more wicked later, okay? Its reputation for wickedness will become more severe later on. But even at this stage, it already has a reputation for wickedness. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. That is a Phoenician colony, I think it's Phoenician, colony on the coast of Spain. At least that's what we generally believe. So he's in Israel, probably Samaria, and he's been told to go northeast to Nineveh, or east to Nineveh. Instead of doing that, he's going around the opposite direction as far to the west as he can get. He's going from Israel to Spain. That's about as far off of the edge of the world as he could possibly go at this point in time. So he ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for the port. Now, again, it doesn't say why he's doing that. It will say why later. Okay, the Bible, as we have found out many times, has a tendency to give us the what but not the why. It's very common for the events to be recorded or statements to be recorded that just tell us what happened or what's going to happen or what to do, but without explaining why. It does, and the story actually uses that to its advantage as a story, because it will explain why Jonah is running away later. It's not doing it here, which is typical, okay? The events of the Bible, the narrative events of the Bible, are often recorded this way, just explaining what happened without explaining why. So Jonah is using that feature of Hebrew storytelling to his advantage by simply telling us that he ran away without explaining why he ran away and saving that until later. Because you tend to think, like it's your natural inclination to think that he's afraid. He's not going to Nineveh because of its wickedness. He doesn't want to be. He's afraid. You think that. Like that's kind of the impression you get. I think that's what the text allows you to think that. It's not actually accurate. That's not the reason why he's not going. But that kind of tends to be what we naturally assume when we hear that. Anyway, he went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port, Tarshish. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. He wants to get away from God. He can't get away from God. None of us can get away from God. We can try all we like. We can do everything that we can think to do to flee from God. We can go down to the depths of the earth, the heights of the heavens, the innermost caves of the mountains, the bottom of the sea, the inner rooms, out in the open fields, out in the desert, way out in the wilderness. We can do anything we can think to do to get away. Out to space, maybe now even, to the moon, We can do anything that we might think to do to get away from God. But we can't get away from God. We are fighting a losing battle. We are fighting a losing battle. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea. So God knew where Jonah was, and he was where Jonah was. Doesn't matter how far away Jonah tried to get from God. The Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. So the Lord is the Lord of nature. He's not just the God of Israel. In this day and time, now Jonah wouldn't have believed this at this point any longer, but in this day and time, the common belief was that each nation had its gods, and those gods were responsible for that nation. And they were local. They were specific to that nation. That's what we're going to see that mindset reflected here in the dialogue that Jonah has with these sailors here in a moment. So this God is not local. It is God of the sea as well as of Israel. and he can follow Jonah to the sea no matter how far away Jonah tries to go. Such a violent storm arose, the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. Remember, they all would have had, they would come from different nations, different ports, different places, and they would all have different gods. Then they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. We're going to see this sort of thing kind of reflected later in the story of Jesus, where they're going onto the Sea of Galilee, and there's a squall that breaks out on the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus is in the ship asleep, the boat asleep. This is kind of similar. It's actually kind of a similar thing here. Jonah is not sleeping because he's resting peacefully in the comfort of the Lord. He's sleeping because he's in a funk, having fled from the Lord. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep?" Now, I'm not like this. I'll admit, when I'm in a funk or when I'm agitated or thinking about something, I can't go to sleep. Like, I stay up all the time thinking about it. Okay? Like, I'm in just a different kind of body or physical response. Unless this is a sleep that Jonah was sent upon by the Lord like Abraham had back when, he made the covenant with God in Genesis 15. It could be that too. Or it could just be, I'm not really clear, maybe the Hebrew word behind it might clear it up, I'm not sure. Or it could just be that he was in a funk and he fell asleep. Some people do that. Some people, when they get in a funk, lose energy and fall asleep. Again, I'm not like that. I have kind of the opposite response. Like, I think about it. I can't go to sleep because I'm busy thinking about it all the time. But this might be he might not have been that way. I don't know. Anyway, the captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us, because none of our other gods are, and we will not perish." Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What did you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" He answered, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord." That's capital L-O-R-D, so that's the covenant name of God, Yahweh or Jehovah or how you pronounce it. The God of heaven. We see that and we just see the word Lord there. That's actually a name. Okay, that is the actual personal name of Israel's God. And if you see that L-O-R-D capital Lord, it might help to substitute the name of Israel, an actual name like Jehovah or how you want to pronounce it. We don't know how they pronounced it. Okay. In the original language, it would have been the consonants, J-H-V-H or Y-H-V-H, however you translate that to English. But they didn't have vowels. And so eventually, they got to the point later on where they didn't want to say the name out loud. So what they did was when they would write that name, that four-letter name, they would substitute the vowel sounds for another name of God into that four-letter name. And then they would verbalize it as that when they spoke it out loud as they were coming across that word in the text. And it's in the text all over the place. I mean, you'll see that word written capital L-O-R-D all over the Old Testament. But that's not how it was originally pronounced. So we honestly don't know how the name of God was pronounced originally. But that is a name. So whenever you see that L-O-R-D, capital L-O-R-D in English Bibles, that is actually a name. That's not just the word Lord. "And I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." This terrified them, and they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." So Jonah is willing to die here. This would be a death sentence for him. He is telling these men essentially to kill him. And they will save themselves because the sea will get calm when that happens. Instead, but they didn't want to kill him. Like, they don't want to shed his blood for their own sake, okay? Instead, the men did their best to row back to land. But they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. God wants this guy to go into the sea. He's not going to let them get away without throwing Jonah into the sea. Then they cried to the Lord. This is, again, capital L-O-R-D, Lord, the name of Israel's God. Oh, Lord, please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, O Lord, have done as you pleased. And so they're asking him not to hold them guilty of shedding Jonah's blood. And he will not hold them guilty for this, in fact. Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. I'm assuming that as Jonah was bobbing along on the surface of the sea, he could hear them do this from his position. I don't know how else he would know they were doing this, but I'm assuming that as he was bobbing along and they were moving away, he heard them, or saw them maybe. I'm assuming. So he's in the water, and he's not going to get out of the water. He's going to go down. I don't know how much he was fighting to keep his... I don't know how good of a swimmer he was. I don't know how much he was fighting to keep himself above the water. I don't know. Apparently he was kept his head above water enough to notice these guys on the deck still, praising and sacrificing. But I don't know how long he would have been there until he succumbed. But the Lord provided a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Well, we've already seen God's control over nature twice now. He sent the storm after Jonah. He kept it going as long as Jonah was on the ship, and then he stopped it as soon as Jonah was in the water. So we've already seen God's control over the natural world here exhibited. Now we're seeing it again by him providing this fish, or whatever it is, to swallow Jonah. This, of course, is one of the things that makes it very difficult for people to believe in the story of Jonah, because we don't know how to explain how a fish could swallow Jonah. There's a couple of things to say about that, though. For one, the text doesn't even attempt to explain this. It just says it happened. This reminds me a lot of the serpent speaking in the garden in Genesis 3, where the text doesn't even attempt to explain how the serpent was speaking to Eve. It just was. It was more crafty than all the other animals that God had made, and it spoke to the woman. It just says that. When Moses is writing that down and reading it out to the people, I've mentioned this back when we read through that section of Scripture, he knows that he is saying something that's going to raise questions in people's minds, because snakes don't speak, okay? Like, Moses knows that. Now, it's possible, if I think very likely, that this was a common story the Hebrews shared with each other and had for some time, for several generations. So they would have been familiar with it even before Moses put it into writing and wrote it down and spoke it out loud to them in their assembly. But he knows when he's saying this, that he's saying something that people don't experience on a regular basis. He knows that. However, he does not even attempt to explain it. Makes no effort to do that whatsoever. I think here in Jonah we have something very similar. The writer of Jonah, whether it's Jonah or someone else that he's told the story to later on, knows that he's saying something here that is not within common human experience. But he is not making any effort whatsoever to explain it. He's just going right past it and acting like it's just another thing. God's already exhibited his control over the natural world and the storm. He's going to do it again later over the growth of a plant that Jonah is going to take shelter in. And this is just another example of that. There's no real need to explain it even further. Jesus, of course, will talk about the sign of Jonah being the sign given to the unbelieving leaders of his day. Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So the Son of Man will be in the belly of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. Now, Jesus was not actually dead for 3 full days and 3 full nights. He was dead for part of 3 days. He was actually dead for about a day and a half. In actual, real terms, an actual hard limit, he was dead for about a day and a half. So it could very well be that Jonah was not actually in this fish for 3 full days. He may have only been in this fish for parts of 3 days, which could be as little as a day and a half. It's also possible that Jonah was actually dead for a while. We really don't know. I mean, Jesus was dead in the tomb. It could be that Jonah himself was actually dead for a period of time and was resurrected or resuscitated or revived while in the belly of a fish. This fish could have swallowed him. It could have kept him in its belly, been unable to digest him, and eventually thrown him up. It could be. We just don't know. We don't know. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. So after the 3 days were up, after the time was up, Jonah prays. I don't know if he's been sitting in this belly for 3 days, just hanging out in the stomach of this fish, or if he could have been dead, and the fish was unable to digest him properly, and so he revives and then prays and gets fat. I don't know. Just don't know. He said, but here's his prayer. Here's what he said. And he's praying this from inside the fish. In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From the depths of the grave, or Sheol, that's the land of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the deep, into the very heart of the seas. He was thrown overboard into the Mediterranean Sea somewhere, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. So he's going down. He may have fought for a while. I don't know. He may have tried to dog paddle or whatever, or float on the surface as long as he could, and then eventually war. I don't know. I just don't know. But eventually, even if he tried to stay afloat for a while, he was going to go down. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight. Yet will I look again toward your holy temple, or I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me, or the waters were at my throat, so they were coming up over his head. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. So he's going all the way to the bottom. The earth beneath barred me in forever. Now that's a reference to the underworld again. In their view, the land of the dead was literally underground somewhere. Of course, they buried people in caves and underground. And in the ancient mindset, and this was true for the Israelites and it was true for the cultures around them as well, they thought of the land of the dead literally being underground, underworld. That's what Sheol refers to, the grave, somewhere down there. Your body is placed in the grave somewhere, and your soul, your essence, goes to some land of the dead somewhere deep in the earth. So as he is sinking, so he's narrating here his experiences sinking into the sea. He doesn't really talk about being swallowed by this fish very much. He may have already been dead by the time the fish swallowed him. I don't know. I mean, they may have been. He may have drowned and then been swallowed by the fish afterwards. I just don't know. Okay? But he's talking about his prayer is narrating his descent into the sea. And so apparently he was floating there on the surface for a while, trying to stay afloat and eventually failing, losing his strength, not able to stay up any longer. And he sank. And he knew he was going to die. And so as he was going down, he looked to the direction of the holy temple, which is what they were supposed to do. Okay? That goes all the way back to Solomon, a couple hundred years earlier, offering his prayer of dedication. It's recorded in both Chronicles and Kings. Let's just read from Chronicles here. As it's a sample verse. Because again, this prayer is recorded in both Chronicles and Kings, and he says this several times in his prayer. It's the 2 Chronicles 6. Verse 22. When a man wrongs his neighbor and is required to take an oath, and he comes and swears the oath before you have all your altar in this temple, blah, 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 blah. When then hear from heaven and act. When they sin against you, this is verse 36, if they have a change of heart, repent, and they turn back to you with all their heart. I mean, there are many times. So the point was, in both those prayers, The people, individually and collectively, were told to pray towards the temple so that God would hear and act. That's what he's doing. So apparently, as he is sinking, as his strength is giving out, and he's sinking into the ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, he's looking towards the temple and praying one last time. So to the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you brought my life up from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. But I, with a song of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed I will make good. Salvation comes from the Lord. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. So Jonah may or may not have spent all of his time in that belly conscious and aware of himself being digested by a fish. He may have been dead. He may actually have died and been resurrected inside the belly of the fish. We just don't know. At any rate, the fish swallowed him, apparently was not able to digest him, and spat him back onto the land. Or it could have been a fish that God specially created just for that purpose. I tend to think not. I tend to think it was an actual existing fish that God just had not used in that situation. I tend to think that God's act of creating new matter out of nothing finished in the week of creation. But I can't say. I can't say. At any rate, the text itself is not concerned about that. Okay, we think of the fish, of the belly of the fish, as being just this insurmountable obstacle to believing the story of Jonah, but the book of Jonah itself is not really concerned about that fish at all. It's just a thing. It's just another thing that happens in this book.